While many printers have shifted their focus, Freeport Press has remained committed to the art of print. For companies that need a printing partner for magazines, look no further than Freeport Press. We offer the capabilities a customer would expect from a national printer while offering the level of customer service clients expect from a family-owned business. Freeport Press. We do print, and we do it well.
freeportpress.com.
Like most things, there's the creative side and there's the business side. From a creative side, we had a lot of ideas. We were like, let's make more stuff. And then on the business side, I don't think one magazine, one title, only publishing the issues is ever going to be enough to sustain a business and make it your job. So it was pressure from both ends. We tried some merch, like a lot of people turn to merch. It's hilarious how people will be willing to spend $20 on a tote bag, but then they're stressed about $15 for a magazine.
Anja Charbonneau would be the first to admit she didn't have a strategy in mind when she launched her dreamy celebration of all things marijuana, Broccoli magazine, back in 2016. Having worked as a freelance photographer and writer, and then as creative director of lifestyle favorite Kinfolk, she started Broccoli with the simple idea to explore Portland's then burgeoning cannabis scene and its culture. Fast forward to today. Anja Charbonneau oversees a publishing conglomerate that produces a number of magazines, books, and even something called Oracle cards, while also spearheading an advocacy group and a whole lot more. If anything has changed, ironically, it's that the last edition of Broccoli was the last edition of Broccoli. Yes, there are new magazines on the way, and new books, and new ideas to explore, because Anja Charbonneau does not sit still, even while sitting atop her nascent empire. From cats to mushrooms to artful snails to all things celestial, Broccoli publishes stuff that tastes great and that's good for you and your soul. My name is Arjun Basu, and this is The Full Bleed. So your story has a lot of twists and turns. I've been calling you a conglomerate in my head, so it's probably going to come out at some point. But how did you get from photographer and then writer, and then you ended up at Kinfolk? So let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So honestly, it was the world of blogging that led me into photography. So I really enjoyed sharing things online. I was in that wave of late 2000s, early 2010s fashion blog community. And everyone was DIY photographer at that point, all taking outfit photos and things like that. And that led me to shooting photos for other people, for small independent designers and local stores. And then that kind of led into photography as a bigger part of my life. So that was my main job for a while. And the kind of happenstance events just spiraled. And I saw a job listing for the art director role at Kinfolk. And I realized, I've been doing all of the things that an art director does, but just as a photographer, location scouting, casting, styling, all of these things that go into making beautiful images, except for the art director, you're just not the one clicking. You're not hitting the button on the camera. So I felt like I had the skill set and took a chance on applying. And they really took a chance on me because I'd never had the job before. And I also was not a graphic designer, which they really hoped that they could get.
I was hoping you would get to that because that seems to be a prerequisite for an art director job, but I guess you learned on the job.
I did not learn. It was a little too late for me to learn without really investing the majority of my time into learning design. And I also realized along the way that I don't want to be a designer. I don't want to be in that space. I had another skill set, and I was lucky enough that I could make that work on its own. I find it so much more satisfying to collaborate with designers who are experienced and talented.
And then you start Broccoli.
Yeah, I worked at Kinfolk for 4 years. So when I left, I was the creative director, and we were split from Oregon and Denmark, making books, magazines, all kinds of things. And working remotely that far away from your team, it just wasn't really making sense anymore. And working at Kinfolk, I honestly felt like making a magazine is so hard, I would never do it. Obviously, it's so tricky. We were a small team, so we got a little bit of a glimpse into the business and how challenging logistics and things like that could be, but didn't get obviously the full picture. But I got a sense that it was quite difficult and really did not think I would do it. But then living in Oregon in 2016, 2017, The cannabis industry was booming. We were one of the first states to come online in that industry, and the first state and even city in Portland to have designed brands and stores that were showing a different perspective on what that space and that plant could look like. My husband was working in cannabis and still is. And he was the one who nudged me, don't you want to make a weed magazine? Wouldn't it be so great? Because the ones that were in the shops still looked like the old version of what you might picture, or they were very industry focused, not accessible to people who were just normal. So it was a real whirlwind of timing and a big risk that I don't think I would have taken if another entrepreneur hadn't been pushing me to try and like believing in me from day zero. So yeah, then Broccoli started in 2017 as just a single free magazine. And now we make so many more things. It's crazy.
Yeah, so I want to get to that. Broccoli was a jumping off point. But before that, you were at Kinfolk for a while. What did you bring over from Kinfolk that you've applied to Broccoli, the empire?
I worked with really great editors, and we had so much fun bringing in vast, multifaceted international perspectives into every issue. Broadness of contributor base and broadness of expression. That was something that we really cared about. And we're pushing at the time that I was there to expand in the magazine. It went through many different creative evolutions, so that was a fun process. And then on the other side, I think that I've been able to execute some of the dreams and visions that we had there, but never got to make real. Like we definitely played with the idea of making other titles with more specific focuses. They did eventually release a kids magazine called Kindling, and that was something we were talking about even back in 2015. So getting to explore other titles and spin things off is an idea that started there that I've happily been able to try out on my own.
So when did you realize that you had something more? We're going to get to the fact that Broccoli isn't around. I'm looking at the last issue. But when did you realize that you had something more or more things should be created? I mean, for someone who has just said making magazines is hard, you're not really quite proving that.
Well, it's definitely hard. But I think so, like most things in this type of world, there's the creative side and then there's the business side. So from a creative side, we had a lot of ideas. We were like, let's make more stuff. And then on the business side, I don't think one magazine, one title, only publishing the issues is ever going to be enough to sustain a business and make it your job. So it was pressure from both ends. We tried some merch, like a lot of people turn to merch. It's hilarious how much people will be willing to spend $20 on a tote bag, but then are stressed about $15 for a magazine. So there's psychology to the kinds of ways people spend money. We tried the merch and we were kind of like, okay, this is cool. It's fun to have a water bottle. It's fun to make socks. But every time we were learning to make a brand new category of item, and the learning curve was so high because it was our first time. We don't know how to make socks. We don't know how to make water bottles. T-shirts, anything with sizes always really intimidated me. At the same sort of point, we were like, there's also books, and books are almost magazines, and they're made of paper, and the same printer can make them. And it's the same skill set that we already have to make those. So we did 2 books in 2020, and that was our first other publication spinoff from Broccoli. One of them is a book called A Weed is a Flower, and we expanded on our vision of the floral theme in the cannabis space and used some shoots from our magazine, commissioned a bunch more, put it into a book all around that theme. We also collaborated with one of our art contributors, a couple named Aaliyah Murawski and Sam Copeland, who make tiny snail miniature art. We had them in issue 3 of Broccoli. We collaborated with them for an event in 2019. They made these amazing reading room dioramas for a big event we had. And we just had so much fun collaborating with them. And they had such a huge body of work, so many fans, and it's playful and fun and weird and perfectly Broccoli-esque.
Snail art.
Yes, so the books are called Snail World and Snail World 2.
Snail World 2 is my favorite book title that I've come across recently, because that means there was a 1 and Snail World 2. It's like those movie franchises. They get to like part 7 and you're like, what? I didn't know about the first 6, but here's Snail World 2.
Totally. And Snail World 2 is a perfect sequel because it's like bigger, longer, weirder, freakier. So it's everything that you would want a sequel to be. But I just loved working with those artists, and they were so great to collaborate with. We had a good rapport. We've never met. It's always been email. So I said, hey, would you like it if we published an art book for you? It's your book. we'll design it. You can tell us if you like the design or not, like a real collaboration and a real chance for them to get to make their book, their vision without the kind of pressure from what a larger publisher would do. Let's make it into a snail art, but self-help journal, like that kind of stuff that they force on things that they just don't, they can't handle art for art's sake unless you're a huge famous artist. There isn't a lot of spaces for that in publishing. So Snail World was a huge success. It's still selling really well. It's just so fun and strange, and attention to detail that they've put in is incredible. It's so much work. You can just see the hours and hours of labor that they've put in with these tiny scenes and their pet snails. So the success of that book really showed us like, okay, we can make books and people will want them, even if it's not the thing we thought we were making, which was originally a weed media company. So that was like the first crack in the glass. Now we've fully busted through.
I would just think that a Snail World calendar would do really well. And I'm sure you've thought of it.
I've always been
But
intimidated by calendars because you have to sell so many before the end of the year.
I know they get old, but I've taken you calling you the conglomerate, publisher of magazines, and we'll get to all the different magazines and books, advocate with the coalition, those cards. I keep thinking I'm going to find something new. I know there's magazines coming, and we'll get to that. I guess it's all been organic. It really is. I want to do this. Let's do it.
That's true. I think whenever you start something, you don't know what it will turn into. You can have the best business plan, which I did not have, or a great grand vision, which I also did not have. And you might still find yourself going in a completely different direction because you are going to be influenced by the feedback, the surprises, the momentum in different directions that you couldn't predict. When we released Broccoli, it was a free magazine, and we were trying to do that model of surviving off of advertising and letting the people and a large distribution kind of push that forward. That only lasted until about issue 4, and then we flipped it into a normal product. So we're like, we need to start treating this like a regular product, because at a certain point, people don't want to keep putting a free magazine in their stores because someone will walk in, take something for free, and walk out. And that's like a little annoying, which I totally understand. But I think that helped us a lot because that level of experimentation allowed accessibility and wide distribution. And for something like a cannabis magazine, that was weird and unusual. You wouldn't bat an eye quite as much now because it's been so much more normalized over the last 8 years. But that helped us a lot. And yeah, you're right. The vision has evolved. I don't think we really knew that we were not going to be a weed media company until maybe 2020. In my mind, I feel like that might have been where things changed a bit for me. 2021 was when Mushroom People came out. And that once again said, okay, well, if you have this and you have this and the book and this magazine and this other art book thing, what is it? And I don't think I knew yet still. And only in the last, I think, 2 years have I really started to accept and embrace we're a publisher now. We are not a brand with one magazine and one product and one message. We are encompassing all of these different things and trying to make that into its own entity that people can understand. The lucky thing that we've had is that even though it can be really hard to explain in one sentence, like, why do all these things go together? What is the common ground between a snail book, a weed magazine, a mushroom magazine that's not about psychedelics? What else have we done? Oracle decks? Like, why do these things make sense together?
Catnip.
It's hard. Oh, catnip. Yeah, exactly. A cat magazine. I can't even quite articulate it the way that I wish I could for my little elevator pitch or whatever. But the reader and the audience gets it. And the kinds of stores that buy stuff from us and the people will place these orders with these disparate items in it. And I'm like, okay, it does make sense. Because a lot of it is about the editorial sensibility, the aesthetic, and the appreciation of nature that runs underlining all of it. The creatures in it, the plants. So there's something that kind of like hits people in the right place, even if it's not obvious at first.
I was just trying to think of the Venn diagram of all of this stuff. And then I added the new things, which we're going to talk about. And I actually thought it was tight as a Venn diagram. There's a big space in the middle that you occupy. You found your audience, and they do trust you because of this equity you built up through everything you've done so far. You care about similar things. You're working on I don't want to call it a music magazine because I don't think that's what it is. Heartbeat, which is dedicated to the art of listening and sonic curiosity. So what is that about?
Yeah, this was like the quickest decision we've made to do something. It was actually kind of inspired by hearing that Pitchfork was being folded into another major
Yeah.
publisher and no one knew what that meant. And I think it's still a question mark. Not that's like the be all end all for music media for me or anything, but I was like, oh, what a great opportunity for someone to show up and make the music media that they've always been wanting. When things like that happen, you see a lot of people's experiences and memories and critiques and praises. And I think a lot of people expressed, like, well, it was never really what I wanted anyway. Like, why were the reviews so important anyway, or whatever? And I was just like going on Instagram stories and talking about, okay, this is an opportunity. If anyone wants to grab it, this would be cool because it's a space with so much to talk about. Music is part of everyone's life in one way or another. And I was like, I don't want to do it, but someone else should. And then I went to bed. And then the next morning I was like, what would it look like if the Broccoli editorial team tackled this subject? And me and my other two editors, Stephanie Madewell and Ellen Freeman, we just get in our chat and suddenly we're bouncing all these ideas back and forth about what it would mean to us to do a magazine about music and sound. And then we were like, let's just do it. So it was a quick decision, of course, then a long editorial process. But yeah, I think the magazine is really about like music, sound, which includes like sounds from nature and just sound in general. And then how the way the things we hear makes us feel. So there's a very emotive quality through everything. We're talking a lot about memory, we're talking a lot about history, we're talking about nature, science. So just like every other Broccoli magazine, we're coming at the subject from more angles than you might anticipate, lots of different formats, and really tapping into what's personal about it and not what's a PR story. Because, of course, in print, it's useless anyway because everything's always late. But the process has been really cool, and it'll come out probably, I think, around July. So I'm really excited to see it come to life.
As you were saying that, I was thinking of the book I'm reading right now, which is Sings Like a Fish. And it's about how fish hear. They're talking about the nature of sound and the roundabout way that science, they knew that fish could hear since Aristotle, but they didn't know how because they don't have obvious ears. But anyway.
Yeah, that would be a great heartbeat story. And
it would be. That's why I brought it up. I should have said that. Okay, and then you have Sun and Moon.
We're in our wild card era, I think, because Sun and Moon is also just an idea that kind of just got thrown out quickly, randomly, and then we're suddenly like, oh, absolutely, let's do it. So I've, for a while, wanted to do a magazine where it's two themes in one magazine and the kind where you have two covers and the other one's flipped, reversed, where in the middle you meet and then you turn it around. I think that's such a cool format. I had a storybook as a kid that was, I think it was like Peter Pan and Little Red Riding Hood mixed, that format, and I just loved it. So Sun and Moon is a celestial magazine. So we're going to talk very strictly thematically around the sun and the moon. When we were building out our run sheet of stories, we had two columns that Stephanie called the cosmic balance run sheet because we wanted the themes and the ideas to mirror each other in a way that wasn't just super obvious, but in a subtle way that the reader might not notice directly, but it'll be like percolating in the background as they're reading. I think all of our writing is in for that, all of the commissioned essays. And I'm about to do a big art submissions call, which is always exciting for me because I do all of the art commissioning. So that one is a real experiment because it's not very obvious who the reader is. I know who the reader is because I know they're in our sphere and they are like clearly interested in the mysteries of the universe, but it's not something
they fit in that Venn diagram I was talking about.
They do. It's not as clear as cats. You might not be like, my sister loves her cat, so I will get her this magazine. But I think people will really enjoy it, and I'm excited. And yeah, it's interesting, the Venn diagram. I think a really cool example we have of that is the oracle decks that we've been making, which were inspired originally by Mushroom People magazine. We thought like we learned so many interesting things and about mushrooms, and people connect to the concepts in mushroom world very deeply and apply them to our human nature. There's a really nice parallel with a lot of that stuff. And we were like, oh, this would make such a cool oracle deck. And just in case someone isn't familiar, it's like the tarot has a structure and they're all the same story. And the cards have the same meaning no matter who makes the deck, generally speaking. Oracle decks are cool because you can make up your own system. So you can make them about anything. They can be creative prompts. They can be introspection tools. They're very open-ended and you don't really need any kind of real historical knowledge except about the subject you're writing about. So we were like, great, let's make a mushroom oracle. We worked with Bethany Van Rijswijk, who was an artist in Mushroom People, for the art. And then our editor, Ellen, wrote all the copy. That was also really popular. And since then, we've done different themes like seashell and flower, crystal. We have a celestial one coming out, and we're working on a fairy tale one as well. It's interesting because for me, I visualize almost like a Zelda gameplay map as you're unlocking different environments. So we have the beach for the seashells, and we have the mountains and the underground. It would be like an upstairs, downstairs kind of thing with the crystals. The mines, you have the forest for the mushrooms. You've got the sky for the celestial one. It's like we're unlocking a map every time we have something new released. And I like the way they interact. I think that's really fun.
Now, there's a adjacency or a connection to Mildew as well. Is there not?
Absolutely. So Mildew is a magazine made by Ellen Freeman, our editor. She is like a secondhand master. It's like she only buys used secondhand items. It's just like her style. It's great. And she's such an incredible editor and writer. And because that's one of her greatest passions, the secondhand world, she decided to start her own magazine. It's so good. It's exactly like a broccoli thing, but extra Ellen. And that, to me, that's perfect because I love her vision.
We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Jeremy Leslie at Mag Culture. We're proud to support The Full Bleed because we love magazines too. Visit magculture.com and see why print is far from over. It's just getting started. Read the journal for interviews and reviews, listen to our podcasts, visit our shop in London and online, and come to our live events in London and New York. We love magazines. Subscribe to our newsletter for weekly updates, all at magculture.com.
Print is Dead is made possible by the support of the Society of Publication Designers. The SPD powers the future of visual storytelling, setting the standard for editorial excellence and shaping the future of visual culture. For more information, visit spd.org.
Why did the flagship stop? Why was the last issue your last issue?
That's a great question. And there's so many different reasons. I think that in one big way, it was just like time. I know that's not a real answer. We made 20 issues across 7 years, and I was just getting bored. It's a big part of the reason. I wanted to make other things. I didn't necessarily see it growing much beyond where it was because we could not commit the kind of energy to the brand the way that it used to be. And to be totally frank, I haven't used cannabis in a long time. And so that part I didn't think would have an effect because you never really needed to use weed and to be a weed person in order to enjoy the magazine. But I think I started to feel like the storytelling was getting stagnant for me. And that's a little bit a reflection of the industry as well, because once things became more normalized, there was a bit of repetition in state to state or country to country. They were all going through the same thing on different timelines. And it was feeling harder for me to find what was feeling exciting or what was feeling new. And I just wanted to direct that editorial energy to another place. Plus, it's just so expensive to make magazines. So we can do more with these big kind of one-off or once every couple year titles than we can to have that pressure of releasing on a schedule twice a year was where we were at. It was just too much of a burden there as well. All the little signs were coming from all the different directions. It was a few issues ago that I was thinking okay, I don't think this is going to go on forever. And that's probably for the best. And I think it's beautiful because I think for 120 is such a wonderful big round number. It feels like a real accomplishment. I love what we've done. I think the magazine's really special and it's meant a lot to a lot of different people. And I think it's a great reflection of the way that magazines are time capsules and they are reflections of a moment in time. Whether that moment is a period of 9 months that you make a magazine or it's 7 years and it's capturing that bit of culture and that bit of that moment in time. And to me, that's really special. And I love it more now that it's has that end cap on it. And I like to know that we did it.
Your editor's letter, when I read it, I highlighted it. I'm going to read that paragraph. But the metaphor of gardening is just so apt, given everything you're planting and germinating now. You wrote, a thoughtful gardener rotates their crops, giving the soil time to replenish. Certain plants nourish the earth, creating a cycle that sustains. It's no secret that we've been tending other fields, creating books and magazines that are worlds of their own, and our publishing projects will continue to grow. If you've loved the stories and art you see here, you'll find those same sensibilities in our other titles, but with their own special twists. This whole idea of the garden, I know I've been calling you the conglomerate, but that's the same thing. It's actually a much nicer way of putting it than
Yeah, I'm a better writer.
conglomerate. You have a field, and sometimes you have to keep it fallow.
Absolutely. And I think one of the really special things that has allowed us to evolve in this way and keep putting things out that are strong and that are appreciated by the audience is that our editorial and design team have been exactly the same for a long time. There are a core 5 of us who have been together since day one. And then a few years ago, we have a second designer joined us, and it's been years that we've been working together now. So from the editorial effect that the reader experiences, it's all coming from the same place, and it's all been coming from the same place and will continue to come from the same place. So I think that from that alone, we have earned and can keep trust from the readers that if they liked one thing, they'll like another thing. And from my perspective as a person running a business, it's like, I'm the luckiest person in the world because having that level of experience and trust with the people you work with, you cannot buy that. You can only hope for it. And if you've got it, you just pray you keep it for as long as possible because they're amazing. And it's just so cool that we've known each other for this long and have been successfully working together for this long.
You guys are all in different places, right?
They live in the same city, but they're still far away from me.
That's why it's worked. Yeah.
They don't get the off-gassing of stress if I'm stressed out about something as the business owner. But then the downside is that we don't get that kind of beautiful creative energy bouncing around. We do our best on the mediums that we have. And when we do get together, it's so wonderful. But yeah, that part helps. But it doesn't work with everybody because I've certainly worked with people long distance where I'm like, this is not working. We're not speaking the same language.
Back in 2019, I read a lot of interviews you did, actually. You talked about the difference in magazine culture between the States and the rest of the world. We don't really have a major magazine culture in the United States, but in Europe, they're still very successful and they're still very present. The same in Asia as well. Everyone buys magazines, so it seems to be a North American problem more than anything else. And you also, in that same interview, talked about cost. And you brought it up again. Has there been a convergence at all, do you think, or is it the same issue? Or maybe the other side has come true in Europe and Asia?
I think largely it's still true. You're not going to find many newsstands and environments like that in the US. We actually just got a new store that opened in Portland called Chess Club. I'm not sure if you've seen them before, but they probably have well over 200 different independent magazines. And it's an amazing store. They do all kinds of community events. And it's like a miracle that they're here. It's so rare. That style of retail is so rare in the US. There's also a really cool shop in the desert in California called High Desert Times. And I think they've been finding some good success with a magazine forward model as well. So that's really cool to see. On the retail side, a lot of the people that we wholesale with are what you might call the shoppy shops. They're little boutiques with candles, home goods. They have maybe a couple books, but a lot of them are getting into selling magazines as well. Just a small selection, but it helps. It helps remind the public that magazines exist. Independent magazines are a thing that you can support that are good and interesting because they don't have the luxury of having something like a mag culture shop that everybody knows about over there. They're quite lucky. I hope we'll see that grow more. I know there's so much sentiment and discussion online amongst people in media. Many Americans are not sure where to turn because the digital media landscape is so bleak. And the dream of becoming a writer as a career is really fraught. I guess we're slowly trying to show that it's possible to have a print-based business or to be in publishing in a way that is different than the models we've been shown. So there are ways to make it work, and it's just hard to figure out. I certainly have been trying to figure it out for this long, and I feel confident that we've found a model that works. And I would love for other publishers to just copy the model, make other books, make other print things. You have to make other stuff if you want to survive. One magazine just won't be enough, but not everybody should be running a business either. So I think there is so much beauty to be had in a creative project that is just a creative project. It doesn't have to be a business, and not everybody wants it to be. So I think that's something that's really important when you're starting to ask yourself that question. Do I really want to run an e-commerce international logistics company, or do I just want to make a cool print project with people I admire once or twice? That's great too. So back to your original question, I think that you're still going to find a lot more presence of just an awareness that independent publishing is a whole cool industry in Europe versus the US. But I think it is slowly just creeping into public consciousness a bit more amongst the audiences that we care about.
Well, for a long time, I said the only brands that understood magazines and would support them were luxury brands because they're both so sensual. But now we're seeing that young people are coming around to magazines because they didn't grow up with them. And magazines are like rotary phones to them. And they're like, wow, look at this. And it's something you can really sink your teeth into and no distractions. There's traction. People always bring up vinyl and cassettes, but I think it's actually different because I think it's bigger than records. But that could just be me. I have obvious bias here.
Yeah, there's certainly a hunger for it. And the conversation around getting offline, ditching social media, investing more in physical objects and print, it's a popular topic. It's not that the desire isn't there, it's that people don't know where to get that stuff, or they don't even know it exists. So I'm always telling people to look at Stack or Mag Culture if they want to just get real quick proof that there is at least 5 or 10 different independent magazines that speak directly to the things they care about. Like, they're there, they're just not sure where to turn, I think.
Yeah. If there's a typical reader of the broccoli stuff, who is that person?
It's funny. We were just talking with someone who's starting a new magazine about what the audience can look like. You have the fantasy reader where you're like, okay, you usually imagine someone like you. I'm like, maybe they have a cat. They like plants. They're probably around my age, like anywhere from late 20s into early 40s, probably have some type of creativity in their spirit, whether or not they're consider themselves an artist, things like that, right? But I think the kind of surprise is always that a lot of people aren't those things, but they just admire that stuff. Or like me with the cat thing, it really does have a broad span. It depends on the subject too. So I think a lot of people do fall into the obvious category. But then I used to get emails from people who would be like 65-year-old retired master gardeners who found broccoli and they were like, I never thought I'd see something like this. This is great. Nice job. It's like the unexpected ones are cool. I think that's one of the things that I miss about throwing events, because we haven't done one in a while, is you get to see truly who the people are that are interested in what you're doing. And often you'll be surprised, and usually in a good way.
When you were distributing the magazine Broccoli for free, was that just in Portland or was your distribution zone further afield?
Yeah, we were doing it all over. So we had a pretty open door policy. If someone wanted copies, we would send them to them. We did a bit of direct outreach, but we were really lucky to get some good press in the beginning that kind of snowballed. We've got a lot of incoming requests and we were sending them all over the place. And that was good until people started to feel a little annoyed by the free product model with people just coming in and grabbing something.
Especially, I mean, in the cannabis field, I was just thinking about the advertising because that's tricky given the legislation around cannabis.
When you mentioned earlier, you said something about luxury brands, and that's like where the backing often comes for print magazines. And it's been interesting because in the advertisers we've worked with and the brand partners we've had, it's almost the total opposite. It's like independent companies, new companies, small businesses. So there's something special about that because I'm like, okay, we're on the same level. Like we're all just doing the same thing in our own fields. And in cannabis, it's been interesting because it'll depend almost entirely on which state is receiving the investment money at the time. So like for a minute it was Oregon, for a minute it was California. Right now the New York money is probably starting to dry up. Canada was never really an option because the laws you guys have are so restrictive on advertising. So the money would bounce around and you had to pay attention to who's being funded. And of course, it's probably the same investors running from state to state, but also independent small businesses that were doing it themselves. We've always had very friendly rates to people who are like just DIY level businesses who aren't getting the big investment funding. So those have been really special partnerships as well. But yeah, the cannabis world has always been so volatile and like always will be, especially while it's still federally illegal here because the rules are so confusing.
My favorite ad in all of your publications comes from Catnip.
I think I know which one it is.
And it says, get high with your cat.
Yeah, Puff Herbals. They make herbal smoking blends.
And I just thought, this is where I think the whole Venn diagram thing started to form in my mind.
It's so good. And I've had Catnip people ask me if the ads are fake. because they're so funny.
Well, that one, it's a takeoff on a Virginia Slims ad. And it is funny.
Yeah, there's an art to ads for sure. And I think that something that's been cool, people will also ask us if we tell advertisers what their ads should look like. And we've never needed to do that because I think it's a really fun chance for those companies to try to flex their design and show what they can do and express themselves in a different way. And because the standard was set high from the beginning with Broccoli, like they know they're trying to put their best foot forward and be playful and be interesting. And that's like a perfect example. But I love the idea that there are people out there right now that are flipping through catnip and think that it's just all made up. Like the hemp cat litter,
I always say ads in most medium are intrusive, but ads in print are content if you do it properly, which is why Vogue September issue is still a 1,000-page doorstopper still. You don't get the TOC till you're like on page 300 or something. So 3 magazines or media that you're really excited about now that you want to tell the world about.
I knew you were going to ask this question because I listened to the podcast and I should have thought. Okay, well, I have to shout out Mildew because their 3rd issue is almost sold out and it's fantastic. The whole concept of the magazine is that it's about secondhand and creative reuse. So it's not exclusively fashion. There's also just stories about the way that old things can become new again. And I love that. There's a wonderful story in there that was quite emotional about a group that will help you finish unfinished knitting projects. So a lot of those circumstances are like maybe a parent or a grandparent was making something for you and they've passed and you're left with this unfinished thing. And there's like an organization that can help you finish it. It's really sweet. Ellen and her designer Corbin Lamont, their approach to design has this thrift store chaos energy to it where you don't know what you'll see on the next page. It has that kind of wild energy to it that I really enjoy. Let's see, I bought a bunch of new magazines recently. I bought the Nature issue of Fucked. And have you seen the cover of it? It has like wild die cut all over it of these little sort of roundish leaves. And so you can bend back the pages to make it come to life in your own pattern. I just think that's so fun. I'm not sure if I want to bend them because it's going to not get back on my shelf very effectively, but I really liked that. There was a piece in it about an illustrator who focused on root systems and only illustrated them. And they're so detailed and crazy. I almost wish the magazine was like a bigger page format for those images alone. That one is pretty cool. And then what did I just buy? I just bought a couple books. I'm always buying books. Does this happen every time people?
There's 2 kinds of guests, the ones who struggle through it and then the ones who have prepared.
I didn't prepare, obviously. I'm going to shout out a book that I'm seeing on my shelf right now that I'm constantly chasing emotionally called Unicorns I Have Known by the photographer Robert Vavra. And we have constantly put in effort to try to find this man and see if he still has the photos because they're these total Fantasyland unicorn images that I would love to republish into a book. Oh, but that actually reminds, so if maybe a better one that's recent. So we're about to start working on the new issue of Catnip. So we're going to do a volume 2. And I was at the used bookstore and found a book called Cat Flexing. And it's all about workouts where you use your cat as your dumbbell. So you're like weightlifting your cat. And it's an early 90s book. All the photos are in black and white.
Sounds like an early 90s book.
Absolutely. So it's a woman just like holding this fluffy cat in different workout positions.
Does she have big hair?
No, her hair is pretty chill, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Not over the top. It's not like a jazzercise vibe. It's actually quite nice. They're very like sleek and chic photos, but then the cat is like big and fluffy. I haven't done the Google search yet, but I'm going to look up the author and see if she's around and what we might be able to do with the book because it's so fun, so novel. And I'm not sure if she's serious or not. So I would like to find out.
Maybe you can use her for an ad in the 2nd issue of Catnip.
Absolutely. We did a cat books feature in the 1st issue. So this would be a real great addition to a 2nd, if not a full feature, because I love to find archival stuff. And if the photographers are around, then oftentimes they'll be down to reissue things.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was fun.
This has been The Full Bleed, a podcast about the future of magazines and the magazines of the future. The Full Bleed is a production of Magazium LLC. This episode was produced by Patrick Mitchell. If you'd like to comment on the show or just, start a conversation, send me an email at hello@magazium.co or visit our website at magazium.co, where you can read transcripts of all of our interviews along with portfolios, archival photos, links, and more. We've got a swag shop too. My name is Arjun Basu. Thanks very much for listening. Welcome to the future.